In this video, we will look at some simple networks in Gephi. From the startup screen in Gephi, we're going to choose New Project. From here, you can see a lot of different tools, and we'll go through some of these as we work through the demo. Now, you can import large data sets into Gephi and visualize and analyze them, but for the purposes of this demonstration, we're going to create a graph from scratch. In order to do that, we're going to go over to the Data Laboratory by clicking here, and what you'll notice is in this data table, we can look at either the nodes or the edges. At the moment, we don't have any nodes or edges in our graph. Before we continue, I'm going to save. So I'll go to File, Save As. After deciding where I want to store the graph file, I'm going to call this CIDM faculty and go ahead and save that. So what we're going to do is construct a network that represents the faculty and their research relationships in the computer information systems and Decision Management Department at West Texas A&M University. And we're going to do this manually, just so you can see that you can construct a network manually. So if you do work in an organization, you could potentially do this to see different relationships in that organization. And like I said, here we have nodes and here we can see the edges. And we don't have either right now. I'm going to go back to nodes. The first thing that I'm going to do is input all of the nodes in the network. So each node is going to represent a different faculty member in the department. In order to do this, I'm going to actually go to the faculty webpage and take everyone's name and put it into a node. So on the left, you can see that I've pulled up the faculty webpage and zoomed out a little bit so I can see everybody's name. What we're going to do is now add a node for each person. So I'll click this button to add a node. My first node label will be Dr. Amjad Abdalat. Click OK, and you can see now that that node appears in our data table. It's been sequentially assigned an ID, so that first ID will be 0, and it has a label of Dr. Amjad Abdalat. We could also give it some other characteristics if we'd like, but let's keep it simple for now. Let's add another node to the network by clicking Add Node, and I'm going to add Dr. Jeffrey Babb. I'm going to keep doing this process until I have added all of the faculty to this network. At this point, I've now added all the nodes of interest to my network since I just want to look at all the different CIDM faculty. Let's take a look at the result. I'm going to click Overview. And from here you can see that I have several different nodes in the network now. Now we don't have any edges, so they're not connected. That's what we're going to add next. Before we add the edges, I'd like to make a few cosmetic changes so that we can see the names of the people in the department. So what I'm going to do is this T down here is going to show the node labels. If I click that, you can see that the node labels appear. If I want to change the font size of the node labels, I can do that with this drag here. So I'll make them a little bit larger. And I can use my mouse scroller to zoom in and out. The other thing I can do is individually drag the nodes out so that I can get a better picture of what's going on. So for the moment, I'm just going to manually drag each node so that I can read every node label, that I can see everyone's name in the network. I really don't know at this point how these people are going to be related, but the edges will tell us that once we add them to the network. The other thing that we can do is change the look of the nodes. So here you can see that right now they're gray, yours are probably black. Each time that you make a change over here on this panel, when you hit apply, you will see that change appear in the network. So what I'm going to do is click over here on the color for the nodes and hold that click and drag over to kind of a light bluish color. I'm going to do light blue just so I can see the names more clearly over the nodes. So you'll notice that it doesn't change. I need to hit the apply button in order to see that change. If you take a look at this panel up here, you can see the different options for the nodes. Here we have color, which is what we just changed. We can also change the size of the nodes here. Let's increase the size. I'm going to increase it to about 20 and see what happens. You can see that the size of the node gets bigger. And it's actually a little bit easier to read each person's name this way. So I like that. I'm going to keep that. We can also change the color of the label. I'm going to leave it black for now. And we can also change the label size here. So this will be related to the font size that you've chosen. So if I move it up to 1.5, you can see that it gets that much bigger related to the font size. I'm going to move this back down to 1 and apply, just because I did like the size that I had it. At this point, we're ready to add some edges to the graph. So I'm going to return to the data laboratory. Now, since we are doing this manually, let's talk a little bit about what we want to represent and how we can get the data to represent that. What I would like to see is, for each connection, I would like that connection to represent that the faculty members have collaborated in some way in the department. So this could be that they've written a research paper together, that they've been on a grant together. It will just represent that they have worked together in some professional capacity. The connections that you have in your network will really depend upon that network. In this case, it makes sense to choose research collaboration as that connection, but it may make sense in a different network to choose a different sort of connection. One of the toughest questions in social network analysis is where you can get your data. In this case, what I'm going to do is look at each CV of the faculty members in the department and use that CV as a way to figure out if there should be a connection between the two faculty members and if that edge should be weighted. In order to do this, I'm going to click on the CV of the first person in the network to Curriculum Vitae here. Now before I start, I'm going to click on Edges in Gephi, and you see that we don't have any edges yet. I'm going to choose Add Edge. Here I'm going to make the decision as to whether or not I want a directed edge or an undirected edge. The concept that two faculty members have worked together is likely an undirected connection. It's not like having somebody follow another person in Twitter, which has some direction. It's just simply an undirected connection that indicates that they've worked together. From here, what I'm going to do is on the Sedona page, I'm going to search for each name of each professor that comes after this professor in my network. Actually, I think it would make more sense to have the nodes displayed. That way I can tell which names I need to search for. So I'm going to close this and return over to nodes. This way I can see who I need to search for. And click Add Edge again. Leave it undirected. So what I'm going to do is on Dr. Abdalat's page, I'm going to search for the last name Bab. You can see that Bab appears 17 times. So Dr. Abdalat and Dr. Bab have worked together quite a bit. So if we look in Gephi, we can see that it asks for both a source and a target node. The source just means where it would start if it were directed, and the target means where it would end if it were directed. In the undirected case, we can still consider that there's a source and a target, but there's actually no direction, so the source and the target could be flipped around. If this were a directed network, however, it would matter which one we had first. So what I'm going to do is change the target to Dr. Bab. I'm going to leave edge kind blank because I know that I only want to represent that they've worked together. If I decide to add additional data later, I can do that, but for now I'm just going to leave this blank. Going to hit OK. And to follow up, what I'm going to do is look under edges, and I'm going to change the weight over here to be equal to the number of times that they've worked together, because I do want that represented in the network. I'm going to change weight to 17. If we take a look back at the overview, you can see now that the two nodes are connected. So we have the representation that they've worked together. Let's go back to the data laboratory, and I'm going to click on nodes and continue to add edges. So what I'm going to do is stay on Dr. Abdalat's page and search for every other person's. So for example, I will search for Bakir. I can see that that comes up once. So I'm going to change the target to Nesrin Bakir. Click OK. And then I will also change that edge weight to be what it's equal to here, but it's 1, so I don't need to change it. Back to nodes. Let's add another edge. Go to the next person. Let's see if they've worked together first. So Chen does not come up, so I'm not going to add an edge there. I'm going to keep doing this process. I can see that they have not worked together. Let's try Dana. Aha, so Humphreys, they've worked together once, so I'm going to add that as an edge. Let's check the next few names. No Lazrig, Now I look for Lynn, but that's not his name. I'm going to include Payne because we just worked together on a conference paper, even though it hasn't been reported here. And that's the other thing you have to think about, is making sure that your data source is as updated as possible. This is the kind of thing that couldn't be updated just yet, but since I have information about it, I'm going to add it to the network. Keep going down the list, and I've now established the connections for Dr. Abdalat. From here, you can see that this is a tedious process, but it's something that I do need to do in order to get all of the data. But what I can do now is go to Dr. Babb's page and start the process over again. But the advantage that I have is now I don't need to look backwards. If I'm on Dr. Babb, I can just look at all the professors on the page below, and so on. So if I get down to my own page, all I need to consider are whether or not I'm connected with Dr. Shao, Mr. Webb, or Dr. Zimmer. So if I go to Dr. Babb's page, click on his CV, all I need to do is check for the names after. So I can see that I have Bakir twice, so I'll add an edge there. I'm going to change my source node to Dr. Babb, target to Dr. Bakir. Now they've worked together twice, so after I hit OK, I'm going to make sure that I go over to edges and change that edge weight to 2. You can see that the source and the target are not represented by the node labels, but rather by the ID numbers. So if you do have to look back to see who those are, you can do that using these numbers here. From here, since this is a tedious process, I will speed up the rest of the network creation, and we'll take a look at interpreting when that's done. All right, at this point, I should have all the edges in the network. Some of that I did from information that I knew that wasn't on Sedona, but most of it I did get from the CVs on the website. So now what we're going to do is go back to the overview so that we can see the result. Now here, I might take the time to reorganize the nodes just to get a little bit prettier picture. There are automatic ways to do this, but for the sake of exploration, I'm just going to drag these to the side and see if I can't try to get a better understanding of what's going on. So you can see that certain nodes aren't connected. If you're not familiar with kind of the faculty requirements or the different parts of the faculty culture, you can learn a little bit about that from looking at this graph. As I'm dragging, you can see that there are people that are very connected. You can also see that there are lines that are very thick. So the thickness of the line here is telling me the weight of the edge. So you could see that the first connection that we got was Dr. Abdalat and Dr. Babb. These professors have worked together quite a lot, and you can see that as a result, that is the thickest line. What I'm going to do is try to pull the nodes with the largest degree into the center of the network. So the largest degree, we have a few professors that have several connections. So Dr. Abdalat has 4, Dr. Humphreys has 5, Dr. Babb has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as well. Okay, so this is a little bit prettier. Now let me talk a little bit about how I interpret this graph, and I'm sure that you could do this Same procedure for an organization that you're a part of or have been a part of. So if I highlight the node, you can see just the edges that are connected to that node. So I have a degree of 3 in this network, meaning that I have 3 connections. I'm connected to Dr. Babb, Dr. Humphreys, and Dr. Abdalat, which is kind of interesting because I am new this year. And so this tells a little bit of the story of perhaps how I was connected with these people beforehand, and now we'll hopefully work together with them more in the future. It's also interesting to see me connected both to Dr. Babb and Dr. Abdalat when they have such a strong weighted line here, meaning that they've collaborated already. My interpretation, looking at some of the nodes that aren't connected in the network, I have stories for each of those. So Dr. Losrig is new, as is Dr. Lin. Dr. Shao has been there quite a long time, but her research falls outside the area of most of the other people's research in the network. Now, different types of faculty members also have different types of responsibilities. So you have more research-oriented faculty as well as more clinical-oriented faculty. So for example, Dr. Cristostomo and Mr. James Webb fall into the clinical category. So you can see they aren't necessarily connected on the research network, even though they're a part of the CIDM faculty. But Mr. Dana is actually connected within the research network. And that tells an interesting story all on its own, that he's connected both to Dr. Babb and Dr. Humphreys. So you see that you can start to do some storytelling once you have kind of a diagram. I will say that I learned a lot in the process of actually creating this network. It wasn't something that I could see right away, having come in as a new faculty member. I had some idea of how people were connected, but this gave me such a clear picture of what I was looking at in the department. The next thing that I would like to show you briefly is how to calculate some of the simple statistics of the network. So if you look on the right-hand side, we have the statistics panel. What we can do is calculate some of the things that we've already discussed in the conceptual lecture. So for now, really the only thing we've looked at is the degree, how many connections that a node has. So let's calculate the average degree. What I'm going to do is just hit run here, and you can see that I get a degree distribution. Now this is a very small graph, but you can see that it sort of follows an interesting pattern. I'm going to close this, and on the side you can see that the average degree is 2. So on average, each person in the network is connected to 2 other people. Of course, because it's such a small network, you can actually look at it from a qualitative point of view, and it tells a different story than maybe the average degree does. But in a larger graph, this can be quite useful if you can't see it visually. At this point, you should be comfortable creating an undirected graph based on some manual data collection in Gephi.